Hello.
Like video tag. Hi, Theo. Welcome.
What's up?
I'll try
Are
to
there
keep.
people in here already?
Yeah. So we just had a mini class session related to this, and then the lecture is at 10:30, so people will be showing up soon.
Nice. Okay, let me pull up my slides really quick. How is everything over there?
Uh, I think mostly wonderful. Lots of rain for the desert. How are you
Desert's
doing?
treating you well. I'm in the Athenian jungle here, as you can see.
Well, I never know what's virtual or real anymore, which is maybe a great setup for your talk. So
Yeah.
maybe that's real.
Is this like your class or is it more department wide?
Both. So I'll share this in a second with everyone, but the lecture series this semester is partly like people inviting others into their classes and then opening that up to the school.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah, and there's other things going on today, and there's like a conference with some faculty and admin, so might be a little light, but it's recording, so wait, circle back. No pressure.
No pressure. It says here there's a few people in the waiting room.
Oh, great question. Great point. I forgot that I'm in charge because there's an administrative conference. The person who usually does this isn't here, so I guess I need to be more vigilant. Thank you.
Is there a lot of background noise from me?
In a nice way.
Okay, great.
Just just birds and sounds
That's
of life.
good. I'm outside. It's also probably gonna get dark soon, so I don't know how much of me you will be able to see soon, but we'll see.
Turn the screen brightness up.
Yeah. Also, is my connection good?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Just a couple like moments where your video caught, but it looks great.
I'm gonna be broadcasting under like extreme conditions today, so I think it's gonna be fun. I am I am at a friend's like studio space, and we're having an opening here right after this, so it's gonna be back to back.
Oh, wonderful. You can give us a tour at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll jump in and introduce you if that's all right. We can get started.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to be clicking admit as I talk, so if I pause for a second, that's why. This is the next lecture in our spring lecture series, and as I was just explaining a little bit to Theo, the way that part of our lecture series is working is that individual classes are hosting people and bringing them into the class, but also opening it up to the school. So it's a great opportunity to see like a little bit what is the class thinking about, and a little bit have these wonderful voices come into our school. So with that said, thank you so much to Theo Triantafyllidis for joining us today. Theo is an artist who builds virtual spaces and interfaces for the human body to inhabit them. He creates expansive worlds and complex systems where the virtual and physical merge in uncanny, absurd, and poetic ways. These are often manifested as performances, virtual and augmented reality experiences, games, and interactive installations. He uses awkward interactions and precarious physics to invite the audience to embody, engage with, and challenge these other realities. Theo holds degrees in both architecture from the National Technical University of Athens and fine arts. He received an MFA from UCLA Design Media Arts. And I won't go too deep into his expansive CV, but his work is shown internationally in museums and galleries. I first came across Theo's work and met Theo in Los Angeles. The studio space that I occupied shared a courtyard with the gallery, and one day I went outside and there was a giant pink noodle taking up like a significant portion of that courtyard. And if you shook the noodle, a projection of little creatures would like make crazy noises and dance and do all sorts of things. And ever since then, I've sort of been enamored with Theo's work and a big fan of him in general. So that's my backstory, and an opportunity to see many of the things he's worked on over the years, and we ended up sharing the space at some point in Los Angeles. So really, thank you again so much, Theo, for joining us today, and hopefully we'll talk for however long you want, and if we have time for questions, we'll do that.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm pretty excited to get to chat with your students and show you a few things, more recent works. I'm gonna start screen sharing. Actually, yeah. Share sound, optimize for video. Okay. Cool. Okay, so I will be sharing some recent work. I have been for the past 6-7 years been working with the game engine as an artistic medium. I still feel there is a lot of connection between this work I will be showing and my background in architecture. I really enjoy thinking about both the idea of world building and trying to create like immersive worlds, and thinking about systems that perform and interact in these spaces. So it's been quite yeah, basically discovering the game engine as a tool was really clicked with me, and I really felt empowered to create like the type of complex systems that I had been like imagining for a while before that. I'm gonna start by showing you this work titled Still Life with Yum Yums. This was done during my graduate studies in UCLA. This is a live simulation. I will explain in a second. And it's usually exhibited in an arts context or like in an exhibition context with a custom PC that I built for it that has some sculptural elements, and that at the same time communicates that this work is running in real time. Let's watch a clip of it. Sure. So here we have a population of these small creatures that are inspired by this research by Carl Sims in the 90s called Evolving Creatures, where basically a bunch of geometric shapes are connected to each other with muscles or virtual muscles, and then these creatures train these muscles within a given environment and attempt to form their own ways of moving or ways of locomotion, basically. So here we have this randomized population that starts, um, and in each of these creatures, they are given a DNA sequence that has encoded information about how they look and how they behave, both the type of shapes and colors that create their body and the sequence of objects and how they are arranged, and their behavioral attributes, such as how far they can see, how well they perceive their environment, how strong their muscles are, how fast. And over time, their goal in this environment is to navigate the environment and find their perfect mate. Then they reproduce and create their children that share their parents' DNAs, like we all do. And that way, this overall population of creatures is evolving over time. So when the piece starts, they are maybe very like lazy and incapable of moving around much. But over time, there is a growing explosion of creatures until eventually they crash the computer that this is running on. Here on the iPhone screen, we can see also some data about the simulation. We can see how many are currently alive, how many have died, and the current generation number. So these are all some hints on um, what is going on, basically. Sorry, there is some noise going on here. Moving on. Wow, this is a lot of noise. I'm sorry for that. I'm going to speak up a bit. This is another work titled um, How to Everything. Here there is a similar logic. Basically, it's also a performing system, a live simulation. There is but it has a slightly different approach to the previous one. This is a few installation shots at various locations. This was during the Venice Biennale. Um, and I'm gonna show you an excerpt from this as well. Yeah, so here there is a library of actors, how I like to think about them. Um, for instance, there is this hand that is looking for things to poke and caress. There is a knife that is looking for things to slice. There is these animals like the chicken and the hummingbird that are trying to avoid danger. There's some objects that are physically simulated and bouncing around, and there's some objects that are more like background set objects. Um, and this simulation has let's say, like a central brain that is a director brain that is trying to put all these things together, on the one hand as visual compositions, and on the other hand as like scenarios for different interactions. So all these objects are then left in this scene to interact with each other freely and improvise. At the time, I was also very interested in um, a certain style of video editing that was popularized in YouTube, where there is very fast cuts, a very quick montage of seemingly completely uh, unconnected scenes that seem to be really catchy for the audience. So I was trying to replicate this type of um, YouTube montage in Infinity. And also an important aspect of this is having the audience try to piece together some kind of narrative out of this action where there isn't necessarily a very clear narrative imposed by me. Um, I would, I forgot to say this in the beginning, but we can keep this fairly casual and you can interrupt me. I think it might be a good place um, to have any questions that you may have. Or I can also keep going.
Thank you, Theo. Yeah, people, please jump in. That's a great invitation. And also, I just turned my video off so that your internet doesn't get overloaded. So.
Is it like pretty slow for the video playbacks?
It's just a pretty low res. That's all.
Okay. I will send you a link with everything that people can watch later as well.
Thank you.
Do you think there's any questions so far?
There's a question in the chat from Scott asked if you use custom assets or do you find things online?
Cool. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's always a combination. Like my personal strategy is to only make things that don't exist as pre-made assets. Um, so I usually spend a lot of time kind of like curating on found assets and then creating some of the stranger ones or the ones that are um, more of my personal, they have more of a personal touch to them. And I also really like doing these sort of found object type collages with elements. And same goes for the programming of this. So I like to find snippets of code that is usually used for AI in video games and try to see how I can expand that or piece it together with a few other small scripts to create an interesting behavior that is similar to a video game character, but perhaps is doing something more theatrical, let's say. Yeah, I think if there's any more questions, you can pop them in the chat and I can like reply to them as I can. Moving forward a little bit, around that time I was also very interested or starting to be interested in virtual reality. I was also really excited on the one hand about the possibilities of representation of space and virtual space in a very immersive way, and at the same time at the human body and how it's represented within that space. I think the question of avatars is pretty well resolved in video games, but in VR, it's quite a totally new conversation, and there is no like exact solution for this question right now. So for this project titled Staphylococcus, um, I went out in the desert with a couple friends. We This is Joshua Tree near Los Angeles. We found a location. We brought out a computer, a power generator, a VR headset, and everything. We did a quick 3D scan of the area. I assume some of you might be familiar with this technique. And then um, placing that exact 3D scan on location and trying to overlay reality with this very like glitchy and goopy 3D version of it. And also thinking about what is it that um, makes what basically in VR you have one virtual camera that is flying in space that is in a way tricking your brain that you are somewhere, whereas most of the other senses are of your of your body are still grounded in your present reality. So I was trying this as a DIY experiment of seeing what happens to the brain when these two realities are very close but also very conflicting in a way. Um, and this ended up being like a really strange and guttural like bodily sensation and experience and a mind twisting kind of situation, um, which I kind of like recorded and really took some pseudo scientific uh, notes and observations of this whole process, which I then translated into a standalone virtual reality experience that people could see in like a regular exhibition setting. So, and then the other layer that was added on top of that was that um, I also wanted to bring this scene to life a little bit more. So I brought these physically simulated creatures that are kind of similar to the ones that I showed you in the first piece, that would slowly create a body for the player in virtual reality, um, which was a very strange sensation, basically, because by default, in most VR, especially like earlier VR works, there is no representation of the body of the player. You are essentially a invisible, bodiless presence. Maybe you have hands or guns in your hand, but you don't really have a representation of the body. So I was very curious to see what happens if that is reintroduced and what happens when that is not exactly what the player expects to have as a body. Here's a small teaser experience. Wow, my internet is very slow now. Okay. Maybe I can take some questions so far. Um, Someone is asking what type of equipment do we need for these 3D scans. This one in particular was done with a like relatively accessible DSLR camera and um, like a drone flight for the like bigger area scan. This was done in two layers, like one that is more detailed, that is close to the player, and one that is further out. Yeah, and please, if there are more questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
So, Theo, you made this 3D scan and you essentially had the virtual environment in through the VR goggles as you were
Yes,
physically in the space.
yes.
Um, so, did you walk around and navigate this? Like, I see you here, like touching a rock. I feel like that's a very strange sensation being in a virtual reality, but
Yeah,
having physical sensation.
exactly. That was like the very core of the experiment, was to try and overlap and match the two spaces as closely as possible. And then, yeah, trying these different sensations of like touching things, like smelling things, feeling the ground on your feet and the sunlight on the skin. So it was a very kind of like disorienting and bizarre conflict of um, the different senses. Because of course the 3D scan is, I mean, this is the very like kind of polished version of it, but in the beginning it was a pretty like droopy one that was in here.
So that's really fascinating. And do you see that you can find, or do you feel like you desire to have that something in the future where there can be some sort of interactions without actually being in the physical space itself?
Mhm. Yeah, well, this work was then presented outside the physical space. I just tried to like build a narrative and build all this, the outcomes of this like artistic research experiment into a final VR experience that people can see without being in that space. But I still want to install it properly in that location as well. Um, yeah, but as you will see in the rest of my work, like this question of overlaying a virtual space in a physical space has become like a very core question of my practice.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Um, Moving on a little bit, I was still very intrigued by both these questions that we saw in the previous piece, the uh, the representation of digital space in virtual reality, and the question of the avatar and the human body, and how this can really change an experience in VR. I ended up creating, or I started with creating this avatar for myself that I found would be like interesting and challenging to perform as or become. I used this software called DAS 3D that is used for creating parametric, it's a parametrically based 3D modeling software where you basically start with a generic base body and you slowly tweak different values, sort of like you do in creating your avatar for video games sometimes, but with an extreme amount of information and detail. So you can tweak, like, you can say that my character is 80% muscular, 20% orc, 10% elf, 30% pregnant, and has goat feet and all of that stuff, with a very perplexing amount of uh, conflicting information. Um, and it's also like this software also has a very like bizarre and problematic community around it, because it's also very frequently used for amateur 3D porn or like other shady businesses. So I found it quite interesting to try to delve into the software and try to find its biases and the way that um, it represents the human body. And then, yeah, as I said, I ended up with this character that very intuitively felt like something I can relate to and something that would also be challenging at the same time. Um, and then I was also interested in the orcs as this fantasy race, and the way they have been portrayed different um, in different fictional worlds, including like Warcraft or Lord of the Rings and other like places. They're pretty popular, and they are always represented as having their own aesthetic uh, sensibilities and their own um, sort of um, artistic and architectural language that is interesting. Um, at the same time, I was working with a gallery in New York, Meredith Rosen Gallery, that we've done a few shows together. And at the time, Meredith was creating a new gallery space that was under construction. So I decided to get the architectural drawings from her, and as it was being built, I made a version of how it is going to be in VR, and decided to, during the preparation leading to the show, for 6 months, a bit over 6 months, to work in that space and use it as my studio. So what I ended up doing is I was in virtual reality. I started working and becoming this avatar. I would look down on myself and look at myself at the virtual mirror and try to really like become this character, find the voice, find the movement, and find the story, and where this character is coming from and going. And this ended up becoming my sort of artistic alter ego. Um, and then being in that virtual studio for these 6 months, I started constructing um, sculptural work in VR that I then fabricated and presented in the gallery space when it was finally finished. So this is a documentation image from the show. Um, a lot of my friends at the time thought that I rendered this, but this is how this is an actual photo of the show. But it was intentionally put together to have this strange in between being like a three-dimensional sculpture show and a 2D representation. So all of the sculptures that I made in VR were then printed on plywood and presented flat um, in the space. And then there was also this device that I came up with, a sort of viewing portal that operated similarly to how AR works on the phone. So I hacked or misused a VR system to track these monitors in space and use them as these viewing portals. Um, I will show you how this worked. Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about, um, yeah, so here you see a screen that is playing the virtual layer. The virtual layer is a 15 minutes recording of myself and all the objects in the studio as I am assembling these sculptures that you then see in the gallery. And this whole idea with the movable monitors came from the problem of presenting VR work in an exhibition context, because this usually comes with sweaty headsets and long waiting lines, and it's just not a very like pleasurable thing to do in a public setting. And at the same time, augmented reality has its own sort of logistical problems of installing stuff on your phone, and you see it from a very small screen and all that. So I wanted to make like a sculptural object that has this this way of overlaying a virtual layer, but it's also uh, more participatory, more like more people can see it at the same time, and it becomes um, an object in space that is fun to interact with. This is another work from this series titled Painting. Was also produced as a print on plywood with some acrylic laser cuts and a few other materials. And here I will show you an excerpt. My internet is dying.
Yeah, I guess a big part of this conversation is like dealing with this surface. Like, you know, we are, we perceive space and then have to place our ideas two-dimensionally on a painting. That's hard.
Yeah, the
I
video
think I'm,
playback is very far from smooth, so I will let you watch these later if you want and are interested. Um, but yeah, just to show you that this was also like a performance of creating these works, and there was a text element where I was also like talking about the process of making a painting, about some more theoretical ideas I have about painting, and um, also talking about the experience of being this artist avatar alter ego. Um, Let me know if there is any questions so far. Maybe anyone wants to pop in.
I do have another question, Theo. I feel like painting, especially painting, is like a very, well, maybe not. Maybe this is my experience of painting, but it's like a very tactile experience.
Mm-hmm.
And within the virtual world, how do you, well, I guess, where is the surface? How do you know where surface is when you're actually painting?
Um, Thanks for the question. Yeah, this is basically one of the issues that I was, or questions that I was trying to tackle with this one. And here, maybe the tactility of it was quite is kind of impossible to represent in virtual space, but in the physical object, I did end up like thinking a lot about the materials and how the different inks are printed on the plywood, and there is fake plywood that is printed, OSB board printed on top of plywood, and like different plywood textures overlaid, and really creating an object that is very strangely tactile while being basically a digital print. Um, And then within VR, it ended up being more an expression of gesture and of, the relationship between the surface and the body, and like the because of the scale and the more like gestural brush strokes and stuff like that, that it became very bodily in the end somehow, but not necessarily tactile, as you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Moving on, I was basically very much still interested about all these ideas, and um, thinking about thinking about this combination of live game engine plus live performance context, and how bringing these two together could create an interesting interplay between the two worlds, and also thinking about the theatrical stage as uh, by default a very like virtual space in a way, like also very like primitive and uh, like long lasting one. I'm very also like with an architect, like with looking at it architecture wise, it's very interesting to see like actors creating space just by like moving or saying or imagining things. And the theatrical space is this very strange like make-believe space where theoretically you can have an empty black stage and have a couple of performers like create an entire universe out of thin air. So for me, there is a very interesting relationship between that and virtual worlds. And there's also a very strong contrast because as you might have noticed, like working in 3D software and working with virtual space, it is a very like meticulous and precise process where everything has to be described, everything has to be modeled, everything has to be placed, and it is a much more like rigid and um, like harsh reality than the way that the theatrical space works and I described. Um, Let me see how we're doing on time really quick. Okay. Um, I stumbled upon this comic book titled Antigone by uh, Canadian cartoonist Connor Williamson, which I found was really, uh, in a way, was really talking about these very same issues, but with a very different, like from a very different direction. And I also found that it had this strange feeling of uh, taking place in a very near future reality that was both concrete and dreamlike and video game like at the same time. So this very ambiguous space. Also, from what you can see just from a couple of pages, the space here is um, like the way it is drawn and the way it's created is so like fluid and um, spacious that is very interesting. It was a very interesting challenge for me to think of how this can be translated into a 3D environment. Um, so I I assembled like a small team. A lot of the projects, or most of the projects I show you so far, were mostly solo endeavors. But for this one, I obviously knew I had to work with a bigger team, and both because this project, as you will see, ended up becoming a full video game production plus a full theatrical production running at the same time. So it was quite a complicated process. So we got to building a lot of slowly building this world out of the comic book. We used a lot of VR sculpting as a tool for creating this, and then we slowly created a lot of the characters from the comic book. And I really wanted to, as I said, achieve this same kind of very fluid and dreamy feel to everything. So um, I discovered that like making something feel that way in 3D is quite challenging, but then these VR sculpting tools are like a good match for creating something that is more fluid, basically. Um, the the play is taking place in this post-climate change world where the sea level has risen, and this we are in this urban area that is semi-submerged underwater, and there's this lush tropical vegetation that is slowly overtaking everything. This world is on the brink of collapse and environmental catastrophe, but somehow um, like capitalism is in full bloom in this world, and there is this background of social unrest that is developing throughout the play. But our two protagonists are basically completely unaware and disconnected from all this. Um, so the second layer, what I showed you so far is the game engine side of things. On the other hand, we had the question of the physical stage and the physical performers. Both performers are controlling their avatars on screen, and there's this large projection behind them. The female lead is wearing a motion capture suit, and uh, she has full control and articulation over her avatar. While the male protagonist is in VR, he has a much less uh, detailed control of his avatar, but he's able to interact more with the world. And at the same time, he's totally disconnected from the audience. Like for most part of this performance, he's totally lost inside the headset and he cannot see the audience or the stage. Um, and then I like to think about this as a video game or a game in the sense that these two players, these two performers are like players in this world. They can interact with the world, they can make decisions, and they can freely navigate the world. So it is to some extent very improvised the way that they are playing. And this, by the way, um, was first presented in Sundance Festival in a black box theater setup, and it had a 75-minute duration. So this was like like a full-length theatrical performance in its way, in the way that it was presented. Um, and then there was a lot of different interactions between the virtual scene and the stage that we tried, and a lot of different ways we had performers address the virtual scene, interact with other characters in there, interact with the projection, interact with the audience, and really trying to develop a hybrid um, theatrical language that takes a lot from video games and how uh, characters interact in video games. Um, yeah, and when the pandemic happened, we also tried a version of this where it was a live stream performance where people um, could chat with us in the live chat, and the performers could see that and sometimes would interact with it. So it became this more participatory version of the performance. It was quite fun to perform during the pandemic. Here's a clip of it that's probably gonna look, oh no, sorry.
Yo, Linksa. Yo, how do you stay so styled and composed all the fucking time?
What?
Always looking so good, that's all I'm saying, man. You have me out here looking like a slob. A spider slob. Yo, let's play a game.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So here you can see a little bit of the two different layers and how they interact with each other. And yeah, and here you see like there were some secondary characters that were performed off screen, and the performers would interact with them either in the virtual space or through the projection on the physical stage. Yeah, and I'll leave this playing for a bit so you can get a sense. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a
And
question. Go ahead.
yes, yes. Tell me.
I think there's two of us talking over each other. I'll go real quick. How does the camera operator work in this? Is this a preset camera in the virtual world, or is there a camera operator live?
Yeah, I was about to say about that. So on the backstage of this, there is four of us performing the game engine. So there is a musician that is playing live music. There is a lighting person who is controlling the lights and replicating the virtual scene on the physical. And then there is a third performer who is performing all the secondary characters using a gamepad and doing voice acting. And then there is myself who I'm performing the game engine, and the way I'm doing that is I can control some parameters of the world overall, like a weather system, a day and night cycle, the traffic patterns inside the city, and some of the secondary characters. And I can control all the cameras. So each scene has 5 camera rig that is kind of similar to reality TV, and using different buttons, I can decide like whether we want to show like a wide angle shot or we can do a close up on one of the performers. So the projection is also edited live and trying to follow the action. And there was also a lot of interesting things that we could do uh, while improvising. Like we made the whole system in a way that is pretty flexible to different things that need to happen on the stage. And I think there was one more question. Was there one more question? Or I can move on a little bit. So this is the last project I wanted to show you. This is a more recent one. This series is called Radicalization Pipeline. It is referring to and kind of as a artistic response towards, on the one hand, January 6th incident and the general sort of research and problem of online platforms that has been like extensively studied and reported on at this point, which is this idea of the radicalization pipeline of platform algorithms such as the Facebook feed or the YouTube recommendations seem to be optimized for user engagement and subsequently optimized for extreme content. So it has been shown that people who would consume political content of these platforms would very soon be pushed towards a rabbit hole of increasingly extremist content that was really blooming during the past few years. And a lot of researchers are attributing political polarization to a certain extent to this problem, basically. For this series, I created a few ceramic sculptures that are these weapons that are they look similar to like video game weapons, but they're made of ceramics. They are very fragile and very like tactile objects, and together with them I made this new live simulation work that I'm going to show you soon. And then this work was presented both as a screen work and as a large projection. This was a show I did in Arles in France inside a church space, together with a seating installation and this large projection. Here is a clip of this. If it manages to load. Okay, not very optimal playback, but as I said, I will be sharing these slides with you and you can check them out. You can also find all of these in slimetech.org. But yeah, that was pretty much All I wanted to show you, there is a few other projects on the works and other past projects that you can find on my website. But yeah, I think we have quite some time for questions if you have any. I'm gonna maybe stop sharing the screen and pop back into the Zoom.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Even in low resolution, it's like the environments you're creating are still like so present and
I'm
dynamic.
very sorry for the tech issues.
That's okay. That's
I
the
hope.
world we're in right now. I would love to jump in with one question, and then I'm sure that some of the other people here have some questions. I mean, just in terms of where we are in our class, like it's a half semester class. We just started and we just opened Unity for the first time last week. So I know that people have like, their minds are blown in a technical capacity sense in some ways for thinking about how you do these things, but there's so many other implications and interesting things to ask about here. So I hope people are generating questions. And I was just really, I'm curious, just to open it up, you talked about your avatar that you created as a sort of amalgam of kind of conflicting information. And that like phrase conflicting information seems to actually encapsulate many of the things you do, like both in the sense of the kind of like narratives you're presenting and that you're asking audiences to kind of develop their own sense of what's happening because there's many different like conflicting motives or deep meanings that are present. But also in the kind of like medium overlays that you present, that there's like a physical space, but it's often like 2D, maybe it's plywood printed, and then there's the 3D. So there's all these kind of interesting ways that I see like conflicting information as present in your work. I think sometimes, you know, we have a lot of ways in architecture of like smoothing out conflicting information, whether it's in like a design or like construction process or like clash detection, right? But what I'm curious for you, like, what is the productive capacity of conflicting information? Why is it like so interesting in some of the work you do?
Yeah, I think I definitely like kind of like having the audience try to draw their own conclusions out of these works. I'm also like, I feel like I don't know anything, and I'm just like I have a lot of questions and I want to like put them out there in some way. I'm trying to communicate some inner conflicts maybe, but yeah, and I think what I find very interesting is that the medium of simulation and the game engine, to a broader extent, are very interesting mediums artistically, because um, they have the capacity to make the audience sort of feel new things and like have new responses that were not they don't very easily translate um, in other media. And um, there is also this sort of like very emotional and visceral response that I am looking for, that I'm trying to get to. And the medium itself it has the capacity for it, but it's not necessarily something that people usually use the game engine for. So that is where I think it's an interesting territory. Thank you all for your kind words. Maybe I can reply to the limitations of technology. I have been working with this technology for a little bit. I like to have like a playful approach, especially in the early years. I literally had no idea how any of this worked, and that was important part of the process, and like discovering and failing and like trying to get to some place and having to like avoid all the obstacles to get there. Now I feel I'm finally starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with the game engine, and have a more ease at like creating something that is close to what I'm imagining. Um, but it's also a very tough medium in the sense that usually it takes like huge teams to build like a full game, or to build these very like detailed 3D scenes and animations and sound and all the things that have to go into this. So as an artist working mostly alone, you kind of have to discover the DIY version, and the very like you have to be very efficient with the time and the resources, and have to like come up with quick solutions to all of these. So it's, I think that is a very interesting limitation. Yeah, I can talk about the avatar a bit more. Um, I I found it interesting. It's definitely in some ways a reflection of myself, but it was for me an interesting way to think about gender expression, to think about race. I mean, in a very like obviously coming from a point of privilege, and but trying to use the virtual space as a way to explore some of these questions. And I think that that is there is of course a very big conversation around that in within the game community. And there is I really like actually one thing that artist Angela Washko was saying, that she has spent a lot of time within World of Warcraft doing artistic research and spending hours and hours like talking to people and performing within the game. And one of the things she was asking people was asking a lot of like young guys why they pick female avatars. And it was very interesting to see the range of replies from, oh, I'm going to spend so much time in this game, I'd rather be looking at a female body than a male body, and to people like actually wanting to try out performing as different gender than they are, and like seeing the implications of that to other players. So it's quite interesting to see within the metaverse like how where it becomes suddenly easier to try different representations of one's body, and see the responses that you get, the and seeing whether the virtual avatar is something that is disposable and we can very quickly shapeshift, or is something that we want to like make a certain connection to, and like decide to represent ourselves in a certain way.
I'll ask another question, and then we have maybe like, Theo, do you have like 10 more minutes, or five or 10 more minutes?
5 would be better, because I feel a certain like push towards going to that opening up there.
Oh, okay, great. No, and your background's been like wonderful, that like some of your video games have like had like nature sounds, but then I know that some are coming from your directed environment.
Yeah.
I'm just, one of the things, I mean, I think that the different mediums that you're playing with, in addition to allowing for different forms of expression and thinking through identity, and you know, putting yourself into that work is so interesting, that they also expose these kind of rifts in the way that sometimes in architecture think about mediums as like, you know, drawing and building and these kind of static categories, but like in the virtual environments, the mediums you're playing with, they're also like lighting and movement interaction, that like I think in that Joshua tree there's like a light that's like traveling, which is not something we're used to. I guess I just think as a kind of, in our context here, like what are the sort of possibilities that like playing with the kind of different medium format, translation, virtual, augmented, avatars, screens, and lights that are all present in your work, like how does that open up new territory for
Yeah, I think I
architecture?
always for a quite a long time now, I feel like this is definitely um, a whole world that is opening up to architects actually, because I feel like the kind of like education and training is really preparing someone to be able to face these more like open-ended questions and like variety of media. And I think that the thing I find exciting about these game engines is this kind of like total artwork situation where you have to do everything from like animations and lighting and sound and try to create a coherent, some kind of coherent world, whether it is very like simple and abstract to being very like a representation, a close, realistic representation of our reality. Yeah, I think it's very fun to try to double in all of these like separate things.
Maybe that's a great place to wrap up in thinking about what kind of things it opens up for different work, but also for like educational experiences. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Beaming in
Thank
from
you.
Athens. I know it's nighttime, like you said, it got a little darker. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Have a good opening and evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.